my father was a victim of the opioid crisis, first as a veteran and then not having the care that he needed after that, and then working in hard jobs that beat his body down, that pushed him to need those things. And so it's just a revolving cycle.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Ryan Cagle is running for State Senate District 5 in Alabama. Ryan Cagle, welcome to the Valley Labor Report. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, stoked to be here. Thank y'all.
Really happy that you took the time. Really do appreciate it. Let's start with your background and your motivation for running. Right? I mean, not most people don't run for state senate. Most people don't run for office, and so just give us a little bit of try to help us understand what made you want to take this step.
Yeah, so I'm a minister in the Disciples of Christ tradition, but I've kind of been all over the Christian spectrum over the years, and community organizer here in Walker County, working on multiple fronts. And a lot of the motivation, honestly, it all came as even a surprise to me, and I think to a lot of people in my immediate family and friend circles, because I've been fairly ambivalent in life about electoral politics, but over the last 3 years in particular, I've just seen the continual failure of our state leadership to address the needs of poor and working class communities, particularly in Walker County, where I'm situated. We've been fighting the good fight on multiple fronts around food insecurity, just poverty related issues, food scarcity and the opioid crisis, and then also just dealing with the larger structures of leadership that fail to hold people accountable. And so those things kind of just pushed me, after a lot of prayer and reflection and conversations with people in my life, to try to at least fight a fight, even if it may seem like a losing battle on the forefront.
What is some of the work that you've been doing in your community around, particularly the opioid crisis and food insecurity? I mean, particularly the opioid crisis. This is something that has really, in certain times, has captured, the nation's attention, even if, materially not enough has been done to kind of address these concerns. What made you want to work in those areas, and what is some of the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, so I mean, just outright, I grew up in a relatively poor home to a single mom, working multiple jobs. And so that's been my direct lived experience. And despite all of my attempts to work as hard as I can through life, that's been basically my adult experience all the way into adulthood. I've struggled to make ends meet. And I live in a community where that is right on the forefront. And so when me and my wife and family moved back to Alabama almost 4 years ago now, the first thing we thought was like, okay, we didn't have job. I didn't have a job. I didn't know what we were going to do. But the first thing we wanted to do was like, we know what it's like to have food. And so we started there. The ministry we run, called Jubilee House, started a 24/7 kind of food pantry. And by that, it just means that anybody can come get food out of any time, and then anyone can come and put food in for their neighbors. And so it's really an alternative model to combating food insecurity. It's a way of inviting people outside of necessarily connected to an organization like a typical food bank structure to just care for their neighbors. So it's both trying to get people fed, but it's also helping cultivate a different way of being in our community around these issues, because food banks are great. Just traditional food banks are amazing. We need more of them, but they're a Band-Aid on a larger issue that is a social and communal issue of failure to make sure that our neighbors are cared for. And so that's where that kind of rooted out of, was rooted in my own experience growing up, in a family that struggled. And so then it evolved into like a larger thing is around our work. It's like, okay, this is only going to be able to feed so many people at a time. And so beginning to think about resilient food systems and thinking about helping people grow their own food and get connected to the land in that way and be supported in that way. And so we started a community garden. We're in the third year of it now, and we're in the process of building an entire community farm. And of course, even that will not be enough but it's a part of a larger social work of imagining how we can do things differently, especially when prices continue to go up and skyrocket. It makes a lot more sense to be able to go down to Fourth Street, in Parish, and participate in that farm project, and know that you're going to have tomatoes, or you're going to have eggs, or whatever it is, because you are communally connected to that food system. And so it's a little bit of an alternative model there, but it comes from my deep rooted history of being connected and knowing the struggle of what it's like to not have enough food, and to not have the income or be able to manage the that grocery bill. The opioid crisis is really even more close to home. For the majority of my life, my father was someone who struggled with, or someone with substance use disorder, and it ultimately is what took his life 2 years ago. And so I grew up in the midst of that. Multiple people in my family have been in active use basically my entire life, or in active recovery my entire life. And so I've seen the way this opioid crisis has radically impacted my own family, my friends, my community. It's really a wildfire that's still raging, and for the most part, our elected officials have done very little to respond to it. They've only continued to reinforce stigma. And even now we have all this national opioid settlement monies coming into various municipalities, and Walker County is the epicenter of the state per capita for this. At one point in time, there was like 150 opiate pills per person in the entire county, which is insane, being prescribed. So that's legally being prescribed. And so this crisis is just eating our community alive. And it's something that's really close to my own heart, because I've seen it rob my family of multiple people. And so, yeah, and the response to that just comes in the wake of our leaders not doing what I think they should be doing. And I'm not always right by any means, but people are dying every day in droves, and overdosing because of this disease, and because of a lack of care. We respond to the opioid crisis with more private prisons, and more jail, and more incarceration, and all these things, instead of responding to it with care. And so basically the work we've done here, we opened the state's first 24/7 Narcan vending machine, the free Narcan vending machine. And since then, we've opened up 2 other locations in Walker County, on nothing but a shoestring budget and grit. And since then have distributed over 7,000 doses of Narcan into Walker County in the last year. So that's 7,000, possibly 7,000 less hospital visits. That's possibly, a myriad of prevent, just interrupting the flow of violence that comes with death, or having the police have to show up to deal with these situations, or anything like that. And so, yeah, that's where it is. It's just basically deciding, like, a lot of the work that we've done here around food insecurity, around the opioid crisis, and other things, is basically said, it's come from the question of, like, here's an issue, what can we do? We might not can solve it, but what can we do? And that's what we've given ourselves toward. Whatever we can put our hands, however we can put our hands to the plow, that's what we're trying to do.
You're, talking about, I want to get into some of the stuff that you would like specifically to advocate for in the legislature if the people of State Senate District 5 elect you. And one of the things that you talk about in your platform, and I think it's on your website, you can give out your website in your answer to this question, but you advocate for people over profits. What specifically do you mean when you talk about stuff like that? And what sort of things would you want to do, within that realm of putting people before profits in the legislature?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things is we have an issue on the state level where our elected officials are bought and sold by lobbyists and big corporations. That's not just some wild accusation. If you can go and you can look up the contribution data for any of your elected officials, then you can see where their funding comes from. And so, of course, when you are paid for by lumber lobbyist, or whatever it is, that's going to be where that's where your economic interests are tied up in, and that's where your economic policies are going to be tied to. And so we have a lot of talk around, like, pro-business models, or those kind of things. But if anything, when I look at Walker County, we know exactly, my even community of Parish knows exactly what it's like for pro business models to be on the forefront, because what it means is corporations come in, they extract a bunch of stuff, sometimes literal coal, lumber, whatever it is, labor, and then when they're done, they up and leave, and we're left in the wake with nothing. And so we have to, I think, prioritize the people over like literal profits for our elected officials. And because right now that's the thing, we know how, if you just look, even going back to like the Warrior Met Coal strikes of recent years, like the states send the National Guard in because they're trying to preserve their own economic interest. KIV and some of these elected leaders are trying to preserve their own economic interest over the interest of the people, over the interest of workers. And so I fully believe we have to have a pro-worker position. And so for me, the policies, around protecting workers, there's some more grassroots type stuff that I'm working with on the forefront, like on community, like the development of kind of like community financial institutions that are kind of publicly controlled, that offer like micro lending and stuff to small businesses and worker cooperatives, with the prioritization of those that are unionized, micro loans for like local entrepreneurs and things like that, and then job credits to help bolster economic benefits that are particularly with businesses that are putting their workers first and putting their interest in the care for their workers on the forefront of what they're doing. And so that's a big part of it, is that. And then, of course, just trying to figure out ways that we can move forward to protect workers, because, again, I know what it's like to be in a situation, we're in a right to work state, which we talk about as if it's this really good thing. But what happens when the business decides to close up, or they decide they don't want you, or you're whatever it is, you're just gone. And then it literally leaves families uprooted in those things. And so I think all of our economic policies going forward, we have to have some way that prioritizes the needs of workers, because, again, we can bring these businesses in, we can have all this big economic development, we can bring these manufacturers in, we can open up new mines, we can do all those things. But if at the end of the day, the people who are working are left alienated from their families, if they're left alienated from having a decent life, their work is not being dignified. And profits are being put over that well-being. We end up with workers who are hurt. We end up with workers. It just feeds into some of these other crises we have. Like, my father was a victim of the opioid crisis because he worked in conditions that beat his body down, versus a veteran, and then not having the care that he needed after that, and working in hard jobs that beat his body down, that pushed him to need those things. And so it's just a revolving cycle. And so if we don't prioritize workers, if we don't prioritize the people over profits, then we're just going to continue to see these fires and these issues increase, because there's no interruption to that flow that happens.
Hey, 5 seconds, just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Yeah, that all sounds great, and I want to pull out something that may sound interesting for folks. You mentioned wanting to support local entrepreneurs, and obviously we're on the labor side, and our advocacy is more focused on the workers rather than the entrepreneurs. But there's obviously, I don't think that you can argue. I don't think anybody would argue that there's not a place for people with an entrepreneurial spirit and who want to, go out and kind of do things on their own and build businesses that serve, the local community. And I definitely like the idea of fostering, homegrown talent and homegrown entrepreneurs, rather than trying to bring in people from out of state to do this sort of stuff. I mean, I saw the other day, Huntsville, the city of Huntsville, had a grant to bring in people from out of state to be entrepreneurs, to build businesses in Alabama. And the grant was they would pay their rent for a whole year to live downtown. And it's like, there are for sure people in Huntsville who would build a business if you paid their rent for a year. I mean, that's crazy. Like, that was just so frustrating to see. And so, glad there's, an interest in fostering, economic development from folks locally.
From the bottom up.
Yeah, exactly. And the worker cooperative perspective. And that's such an important, encouraging through policy good business practices is really important. And talking about worker cooperatives and stuff like that, I'm thinking again of Warrior Met Coal, and the whole reason that started is because when Jim Walters Energy went bankrupt, it was purchased by like private equity vultures and BlackRock and stuff like that, so that they could strip it for parts and pull as much profit out of the state of Alabama as possible. I mean, the union estimated that from 2016, when Warrior Met was purchased and renamed, to 2021, when the strike started, that something like like $2 or $3 billion with a B was stolen from that community that would have gone into those coal miners' paychecks and thus into the community if just the agreement with Jim Walters Energy had stayed status quo. But they gave up so much that it ended up being like $2 or $3 billion being sucked out of rural Alabama and going to private equity investors in New York and DC and Australia. And that's, what Kay Ivey ended up supporting when she opposed the strike. So sorry, I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but
no, I loved it. You can preach all day.
So, District 5 has been a Republican stronghold for a long time. Or, well, I mean, not for a long time. I mean, probably just since 2010. I don't know the history, but I would imagine that because I know the history of the state, I would imagine prior to 2010, it was a Democrat holding that seat. But obviously, for the last 15 years, almost certainly there's been a Republican there. So you're not a Republican. You won the Democratic nomination. This is a special election, and so if you win, you're going to have to run for election again in 2026. But for this special election, what is your strategy to, as a Democrat, engage Republican voters or to turn out typically non-voters who would lean towards maybe voting for a Democrat or not voting for a Republican? What is your strategy to get to a win in State Senate District 5?
Yeah, my best the way I understand it is that I have to root it in kind of the work we're already doing. Is that like with just an example, like the work we do with Jubilee House, there are people all across the political spectrum who are involved. There are people who are very much deeply red Republicans. There are people who are probably much further left than what a Democrat would even be comfortable with, who show up to distribute, Narcan, who show up to the community garden, who help put food in those fridges and work days and all those things. And the reason that's possible, I think, is because, for one, Alabama, the South in general, but Alabama, and even this context, even more specifically in District 5, is fertile ground for the work of community care. And it's fertile ground for it. And we might use, language like mutual aid or solidarity, all the things. It's really baked in. It just needs to be cultivated, right? And it gets cultivated by real relationships, because we get fed on both sides a particular political narratives about other people, depending on what letter they have beside their name or what party affiliation they have. But it's a lot harder for you to kind of distance yourself from someone because they're a Democrat or Republican if you know them, if you have conversations with them, if you get down to the real issues. And so for me, that's been my strategy so far, is I'm trying to build real bridges with people through the relationships, through the work, and kind of bringing us back in locally, because there's all kinds of larger debates and things going on, between Republicans and Democrats and all these things, that not that they don't have any bearing, but there are more pressing issues in District 5 that we can come together across party lines on, because there are needs that we have that are not being met. And we continue to elect the same type of we continue to do the same thing, and nothing ever changes if nothing changes, right? And so the strategy for me is building those relationships. And even in the primary, I had a dozen people call me and say, "This is the first time I've ever voted for a Democrat in my life, and I want you to know that." And I voted just because I wanted to make sure you're supported, because I see the work you've done in this community, and I know we disagree on X, Y, and Z, but you care about the things that are most important to the material needs of our community and what's going on, these issues. And because of that, I know we can work together. And so it's all about relationships, and that's hard work. To me, that's the only real strategy, because we could do all the big talking points or whatever and get off in the weeds of those things. But like the hard work of building relationships is where it happens, because then it allows us to cross that divide and realize we have mutual interest in making sure people are cared for. And current leadership, regardless of the letter beside their name, are failing to meet the needs of District 5. And that's my big point. I obviously ran as a Democrat. If I had, ran as a Republican or something, it would have been dead in the water before I ever even made the announcement. because Matt Warmer, again, I have no issues with him, but he's functionally this good old boy wants him to inherit this position. It's been uncontested since 2010, and that's what they were anticipating. And we deserve democracy in District 5. We deserve options, and we deserve politicians who are going to get elected based on their relationships and their commitments to the people, not to their party and not to profits and those kind of things. And so again, it just goes back to relationships, which is hard work. It is hard because we've been so kind of formed to write off someone based off whatever their political affiliation is. And there's going to be tons of people who vote based simply on that in this election. And that's unfortunate, but I believe that doing this work, we can lay the groundwork for something different and allow ourselves to not be so polarized when it comes to these issues, and realize that there's more at stake here than voting down a party line. And it's a matter of life and death in our communities. It's a matter of actually having the people, the vulnerable people, the working class people, the poor people in our communities supported or continue to be neglected.
Absolutely. Well, that all sounds really good. You mentioned as we're wrapping up, have a couple more questions. You mentioned that you've kind of identified as one of your kind of chief antagonists, the good old boys system. Why? What do you mean when you say that, and why is that something that you want to challenge with your candidacy?
Well, I think, if you just look at the history of District 5, like we've had functionally a Republican appointed elected in the Senate seat since Greg Reed first won the election during that contested election. Ever since then, there's been no opposition. And partly that falls to a failure of the Democratic Party, and partly that falls to a failure of our community to realize that we deserve options no matter what. And so we have this system, Matt Woods, again, I have no issues with him. People in my life that I have major respect for have major respect for Matt Woods, but he is participating in a system that just, out the gate, he had $300,000 for a special election that on the math, for anyone asking, it was a unlosable election for him. And so we have all this huge financial backing going into these candidates that are keeping working class and poor people from even being able to campaign. Again, I don't want to harp on Matt Woods because, again, I don't have anything negative against him, but he's someone who's currently holding a position in the state, and he's getting to campaign functionally on taxpayer time and money, because he gave his own campaign a $50,000 loan, which is almost his entire state salary, right out the gate of this campaign, when he found out there was going to be running in opposition. So we have a system here that keeps, and by good old boy system, I don't mean Republican, I don't mean Democrat, I mean it keeps working class and poor people from engaging in the in having pathways towards leadership, because we are outnumbered, we are out moneyed at every turn, and we're out supported by the systems that are already in place. And so that's a big thing for me, is challenging that system. I look around in my own community of Walker County, and I see how people in leadership have continued to abuse those positions over and over and over with no accountability on the local level. We see it on the state level. We see how the system continues to support leaders who don't have the economic interest in the material interest in the well-being of their people in mind. They have profits and party motives above everything else. And so my hope is to bring this back to the ground. I hope that if anything, I can bring this conversation back to the ground. We can get out of the culture war nonsense, and get to the ground and say, there are major barriers in place that prevent working class people from having an opportunity to actually be in leadership in this state and in our communities. And that's by design. It's absolutely by design. And so that's what I mean by the good old boy system. We have a system that supports and appoints who they want in those positions, that ensures they have the money and the backing, whether it's from corporations or lobbyists, to get in those positions, and to have a massive economic disparity between them and the people who actually live and work and struggle and fight in our communities. And that's a big thing too, going back, when I think about our leadership, there's definitely things. I even look at Gregory. There's things that he voted for that I think was the right decision or whatever. But I constantly go back to, this is with ministry and all these different things. Is that Gustavo Gutierrez said, "If you love the poor, tell me their names." And the problem is, and so what he's getting at, he's not just saying, name off a bunch of poor people. He's saying he wants to know, if you love the poor, that means you're actually in relationship with them, and you're actually struggling and living amongst them and with them and as them. And so for our elected politicians, we keep electing people who are so far removed from the actual needs of our communities, because this is the way the system's set up. We keep electing people who they don't know the names of the poor. They don't know the people in their communities who are struggling to pay their bills, the single moms who are working multiple jobs. They don't know the people who lost their job last week because their car broke down and they have no ability to do anything about it. They don't know the people that are working in a factory who lost a finger or something and just got, chugged to the side because they had no worker protections, because they live in a different world entirely. And they live in a system that is built for them and not for the majority of the people in this community. And so for me, challenging the good old boy system is challenging that. It's saying we need actual representation. Whether you're a Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter to me. You need actual working class and poor people need actual representation. And by and large across the state, we do not have it because there's a system set up that prevents it from happening.
And so if you are elected, you'll only have one legislative session before you're running again. And so what do you hope to achieve in that legislative session? And how would you measure success?
This is one of those, this is a really hard question, but it's one that I think is very important, is because I can't make any promises to the people of District 5 other than the fact that I'm going to continue to fight for them tooth and nail the same way that I fight for them every single day in Walker County. That's the best I know I can do, because again, if I am elected, I'm coming into a system that is still, even at that level, stacked against a lot of these ideas. But for me, success would be knowing that the people in my community said, Ryan, we saw you fight for us, and we saw that you did everything you could. Even if things failed on the legislative side, to have the people in my community who are most impacted by these issues say, at the end of the day, you fought for us. That to me is a success. That is what I would measure it by what the people said, not by any of those other things. Not by any other larger measures. It's about how the people seen the work that I did and what they came away with. And of course, I would love to see certain things happen in that first year. I think we have to have massive reform. We have to find ways to protect these things. So I have a lot of policy issues and things that I'm working for on my platform that I want to keep at the forefront. And those are the things that I'm going to be fighting for. Those are not the only things that are obviously crucial or that I find critical in our communities, but these are kind of the pillars of the things that I want to push for. And so for me, again, success looks like the people in my community, regardless of the Republican or Democrat or whoever, saying Ryan fought. At the end of the day, he gave everything he could to fight for these things and listen to what we needed and fought for our interests, whether it be economic or whatever. And so to me, that's what success is. Because again, you can say, well, we brought this much business into a community or whatever, but if people are still starving every week and people are still dying from overdose every week and people are all these things, then a new business, a new manufacturer, that's not a success to me. But making sure that people's needs, the needle is moving forward even if it's very slightly, is what's important to me, because at the end of the day, we have to keep fighting, and we haven't been fighting. And that's the problem, is we've just accepted the status as for what it is. And so if we can continue to fight and we can galvanize more people to realize we have to prioritize people over profits and people over party, then that's a huge success in my mind.
Ryan Cagle, Democratic nominee for State Senate District 5 in the special election. Thank you for talking to us. The invitation is open to Matt Woods if he would like to have the same amount of time. Welcome to talk to him. The website for Ryan Cagle is cagleforthepeople.com. Let me make sure I got that right. Yeah, cagleforthepeople.com, CAGLE. We had a message in the chat from a Matthew who said, it's not red or blue, it's rich and poor. That is our view. Seems like that's Ryan's view as well. So Ryan Cagle, Democratic nominee for State Senate District 5 in the state of Alabama. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thank y'all so much. Truly.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.